Hey, how's it going? Today we're going to play some games with Terapagos Dusknoir. Now this deck won a $100 online tournament the other night, and this deck just seems really good and like it can be very overbearing and just kind of allow your opponent to not play the game. But a lot of that seems to depend on if you go first with this deck, you're probably going to win. If you go second, it's going to be a lot harder, but you can still win. So basically our main attacker here is the Terapagos EX that does 30 damage for each of our bench Pokemon. And then we have the Area 0 Stadium that lets us have 8 bench Pokemon as long as we have a Terra Pokemon in play. So Terapagos is going to be our Terra Pokemon. And then we have the Dusknoirs for extra damage and to manipulate our opponent's prizes. So we're basically trying to win in a few attacks with the combination of Terapagos, Bloodmoon, and Dusknoir, which we can pop and do 130 damage to one of our opponent's Pokemon, but they do take a prize. That actually ends up being a good thing. So we also have Briar in here. Briar says that when our opponents had 2 prizes, if we knock out their active Pokemon with one of our Terra Pokemon, we take an extra prize. So we can take like 4 prize turns combined with Dusknoir knocking out a 1 prizer and Terapagos to one-shot the active. The engine that we're going to be using is the Noctowl Pidgeot Fan Rotom engine. It's a pretty insane engine. It lets you just do whatever you want. First, we have Fan Rotom. On our first turn, if we have it in play, we can search our deck for 3 colorless Pokemon with 100 HP or less and put them into our hand. So we could grab like Hoothoot, Pidgey, Noctowl and be set up for a guaranteed Rare Candy Pidgeot the next turn. We evolve into Noctowl, grab Rare Candy and Feather Ball. Feather Ball is only in here to search for Pidgeot and to let us get out our Pidgeot with a Noctowl on a really low hand size, since we don't have to discard other cards like we do with Ultra Ball. Noctowl, of course, says if we have a Terra Pokemon in play, we can search our deck for 2 trainer cards when we evolve it. It's a pretty insane card. And as you can see, we're really heavily relying on that engine. We only have 3 Iono and 1 research. So we're just depending on picking all the cards out of our deck, which really isn't much of a problem. You actually like thin the deck out really quickly with the Noctowl and Pidgeot every turn, and usually end up using Squawk on the first turn. We have an Ursaluna in here that might seem a little anti-synergetic because it's not a Terra Pokemon and it only works at the end of the game, so it doesn't work with Briar. But a lot of the games this deck is just so devastating that we don't really need to rely on Briar. Briar's just there as kind of an emergency for when we go second and things like that. I also only have 1 boss, 1 counter catcher, and 1 prime catcher in here. I did add a Pal Pad for the option to get back a second boss, or sometimes we have to discard Briar early or something like that. But we're really trying to win in a few attacks, so I've been finding that that's enough Gust, but yeah, it's been pretty good so far. We have 1 Jet and 1 Switch for switching cards. I really wanted 2 Jet energies in this deck, but I ended up opting for a 3rd Night Stretcher over the 2nd Jet because, I don't know, you just really aggressively go through the deck, and with people playing other stadium cards, we want to get Pokemon back quite frequently. So it's really nice to have the 3. They can bump our stadium. We discard the Hoothoot and Noctowl. And if we have another Hoothoot in play, we can just stretch her for the Noctowl back and get rolling again. All right, so that is the deck. Let's get into the games. All right, so game 1, we are up against a Pidgey in the active. This does end up being a Dragapult deck, which against any regular Terapagos version is a really bad matchup for Terapagos, but I think with the Dusknoir package, it does end up being quite a bit better. Now we have a pretty good start here. I get down the Fan Rotom and a Duskull, and right now I'm just debating if I should just fan call for Hoothoot, Noctowl, and Pidgey and not play down the Squawk, because if I played down the Squawkabilly, I would have to rely on getting a Area 0 Stadium next turn. And with this hand, I have basically everything I need to get Candy Dusknoir, Candy Pidgeot, and attack. And with the counter, I don't know, I kind of messed this up because I was thinking that I was going to be able to go Candy Dusknoir, knock it out, knock out a Dreepy, and then counter catcher up the other Dreepy. But of course, I'm taking a prize, and so is my opponent, so counter catcher doesn't end up being activated there. So that is a mistake on my part, and this turn probably ends up taking a little more time than it should be. But as you can see, my hand is pretty perfect here. I really wanted to Ultra Ball away the Squawk in my top deck, but I top deck Stretcher, which is kind of unfortunate. Either way though, it kind of has to go. And I'm still going to be able to knock out either both Pidgeys or a Dreepy and a Pidgey. And I don't know. I don't think I make the best play here, but it does end up paying off a little bit. But here I'm just Ultra Balling for Pidgeot because I need the Pidgeot to get my double turbo energy. So I have Candy Pidgeot, Candy Dusknoir, and another really cool part about this deck is we're kind of immune to TM devolution. Yeah, right here is where you see that I realize I can't play counter catcher. I'm just figuring out what to knock out. But we're immune to TM Devo because if our opponent Devos our Pidgeot, they're giving us all of our Noctowls back. So we can either Noctowl for a new rare candy or just Noctowl for the cards we need and keep going. Now here I do end up knocking out the Dreepy. I decide that I really don't want my opponent to be able to like attack with a Dragapult and then turbo it up and get immediately into another Dragapult. And I do that before I take my prizes. It's just correct sequencing. If I get something good off my prizes, I can grab something else off Pidgeot. I think I did prize a double turbo this game, so I wanted to see if I got that first, then I could grab research or something like that. So now turn 2, we knock out half our opponent's setup Pokemon in play, or their basics, which is kind of insane. If I was able to get a hold of Boss, I do believe I did prize Boss, and that's what I wanted to get, but if I was able to get Boss, I could have knocked out both Dreepies and one on the spot, but I don't know. I'm still kind of in debate if that was the correct play or not, because it does seem kind of rough if they're able to Turo up a Dragapult and I have to essentially 3-shot their Dragapult, we're probably going to lose the game. And now my opponent here is just going to attack and set up everything on my bench, all the little Pokemon to be knocked out by their attack. And yeah, still in a pretty good spot. I just really have to hit into this Dragapult and set up for another Duskull to get ready for another Dusknoir next turn, and I can just win the game essentially by going down to 2 prizes using a Briar turn and knocking out their active for 3 and KOing one of their bench Pokemon. So I research first to see what I get, and then I don't get any Buddy Poffin, so I grab that with Pidgeot. I need to put down 2 Duskulls so that they will need to counter catcher up my Duskull and to knock out both of them. I really need one for next turn, so I can't just let them KO both of them. And this puts them in a really weird spot where if they knock me out and then knock out one of my bench Pokemon, they're going right to 2 prizes, and I can just play my Briar and win the game on their active with the Briar and Dusknoir. So I think they're going to try to play around that. They do end up grabbing the Duskull. I do think they end up making, or Dusclops, I mean, they end up making a mistake here. I think that they did the math wrong. They were thinking that they'd be able to skip right to 1 prize and kind of like almost checkmate me here. But I don't think that they have enough damage to do that. No, they don't. Yeah, there's no way they could have had enough. They would have had to spread their damage different last turn, like put all 6 on the Fan Rotom, and then they could have done it. But yeah, so we're in a really good spot. We drew right into the Briar, and unfortunately, since they popped their Dusclops already, I don't even need the Briar, which kind of sucks. The card seems so good in theory, but every time I go to use it, I'd either win the game without it, or I don't find it, and I end up losing the game, it seems like. This deck is like really hard to play though, so I'm sure that I'm just doing something wrong. I have played quite a few games with it at this point, and it's definitely one of the more sequence heavy, and prize mapping with this deck is super important, so it ends up being a little tough to play. I never got to play a lot with the Inteleon engine before, but I imagine it's a lot like that. It's kind of like the old Greens deck where you're picking cards out of your deck, but you don't get to draw a ton of cards, so making one wrong choice ends up being pretty rough. And as you can see here, I just knock out one of the bench guys, take a prize, and now I just knock out their active. I play the Briar for fun, I don't know, just because I haven't gotten to actually play it yet, and then knock out the active and end up winning that game pretty handily. Alright, so I put this matchup in here. It's against Charizard. I want to show just how like devastating this deck can be with the Dusknoirs and just kind of how insane the Fan Rotom is. right here first, I'm just like, oh, I can win the game. I kind of wish I played 2 Jet Energies at this point, but this is when I cut the second one. So I want to Ultra Ball for Squawkabilly here, but then I'm in a terrible spot. If I just grab Squawk and I don't get the knockout, then I have no setup. My Area 0 doesn't work, so I'm going to grab Terapagos and use the Iono to try and get into, you know, just like Jet and Stadium, or I figured I could at least get into Stadium and a way to find my Squawkabilly or something like that. It's kind of funny, I do end up drawing the Jet Energy, so if I grabbed the Squawk, I probably would have won, but going all out like that when we're already in a pretty decent spot as it is with our opponent barely getting a setup, usually when it doesn't pay off, it doesn't pay off really hard, and obviously when it pays off, we just win. But so yeah, I end up Ionoing them into basically a perfect hand, but my hand's also pretty good as well. I can grab my Noctowl and just get double candy again, and then I can just candy Pidgeot, candy Dusknoir, and Pidgeot for another Noctowl for boss and a stadium card, and take out both of their Charmanders, which is just, I don't know. This deck is kind of stupid when it works like this, but I also think Charizard's kind of ridiculous deck, so it really couldn't have happened to a better deck, I don't think. Now, I should have popped the Dusknoir first here. I think I wasn't 100% sure if boss was in deck, so I wanted to see if it was or not. But at this point, I should just use the Dusknoir, see what I get off my prize, and then use Noctowl. I guess I wouldn't have got anything relevant anyway, because I had all of my stadiums and boss, it looked like. But yeah, so now my opponent's not going to be able to attack next turn unless they have exactly the Thornton play, which I figure is pretty unlikely. I don't know if Charizard's still really playing Thornton, but I just don't think that they have really the best chances of having it here with all the extra cards that they have to put in the deck now with Briar and the whole Dusknoir line. And since I grab my Terapagos off of the prizes, I throw it right down right away so that my opponent can't knock out my Terapagos and leave me in a really weird spot with no Terra Pokemon in play. I just find having a backup one is generally pretty nice. And my opponent sends up Pidgey, so I'm assuming that they don't have the Thornton play. I would think that they would send up either one of the Duskulls or Rotom if they were going to do the Thornton play, but that is definitely not necessarily true. But I don't know, at this point, I'm thinking that I'm safe, unless their hand is exactly like Candy Zard or Thornton Zard or Thornton Candy or some combination of those cards. But I don't know, I find normally they'll just like slam stuff like that, and they just Stretcher for the fire energy to make it so they can Radzard my Terapagos next turn. But I think what they're forgetting is that I'm probably not even going to put my Terapagos into the active next turn. I'm going to keep attacking with this Fan Rotom until they give me something that is too big for it to knock out. Now I could just grab candy off of Pidgeot here and then knock out like Duskull and Charmander. I don't know. Not too sure about this. I think the research is the safer play, and I can just bring up the Charmander, and I don't know. I don't have to take 2 prizes this turn, so I can just bring up the Charmander and knock it out. I was thinking about bringing up the Radzard so I could knock out Charmander and Radiant Charizard, but that would leave me to having to hit a double turbo off the prizes and a way to get Candy Dusknoir, so I just felt like I couldn't risk that, and I was definitely right because it would not have paid off. So now they're down their Charmander again, and if they knock out one of my Terapagos, they go down to 3 prizes, and I can just win the game next turn with some kind of like Candy Dusknoir Briar play. This, I don't know, this deck is so ridiculous. My opponent here kind of times out for a second, so I'm just gonna fast forward this. I don't really blame them for being so upset. They like just stopped playing completely, but this deck just didn't allow them to play the game at all, which, to be fair, that's kind of what their deck is trying to do, like win regardless of what your opponent does. But yeah, I could just Noctowl for Candy, Night Stretcher for Dusknoir. This is why I like the triple Night Stretcher so much. They come in handy so often. And yeah, now I can just win the game off of the, Dusknoir, one of the bench Pokemon, and Terapagos knock out the Rotom. And as you can see, they were still there because they conceded as soon as they realized that they would have gotten another turn if they just didn't let the game decide what Pokemon to send up. So whenever someone times out, it sends up the bench Pokemon all the way to the left, or at least that's what I've noticed. But yeah, that's not really like the best, most intense game, but I think that really shows how ridiculous this deck is, how ridiculous Dusknoir and Noctowl and Pidgeot are. I don't really think Terapagos is a problem. I think that they made that card really well designed, with it not being able to attack on your first turn was a super good design choice, and it doesn't do like the most amount of damage in the world. But the combination of Dusknoir, Noctowl, Fan Rotom, and Pidgeot are just so insane. And then you throw Fezandipiti in there, like, what are they going to do? Every turn that they take a knockout, you can draw 3 cards, pick 1 card out of your deck with Pidgeot, and then if you have a Noctowl, pick 2 more cards out and manipulate their prizes and take extra prizes. Yeah, I don't know. It's just a little oppressive, a little too much, but luckily its win rate is definitely a lot worse going second, and I'm sure that there's plenty of decks out there that beat it. It's just going to lead to kind of a weird meta, and I don't know, I would think that it could be the BDIF, because if the meta warps around a deck completely, I think that the deck that it's warping around tends to be the BDIF. At least that's how I define it, but we'll find out. Maybe it's not, maybe it sucks. But when it goes first, I just find that it's extremely oppressive, and you kind of win games regardless of what your opponent does. So yeah, that's the deck. Like or dislike, comment, and subscribe. Take care and have a good one.